Hi, everybody. Martin Root with Project Heaven on Earth, and I have a wonderful guest, Mary Alice Arthur. I've known her for 10, 15 years, and we first met at a conference that I spoke at on spirit and work in New Zealand. She was living there at the time. She's American, and she was one of the conference coordinators, one of the big boobahs, and I spoke about Project Heaven on Earth then. That was years ago, and we've remained friends ever since. And why I wanted to interview her today and have you meet her is because her expertise in story. She has gone farther into the depths of what a story is and how it works than really anyone I know. Um, every time I speak to her about story, I discover something new that I haven't realized before because of her wisdom and expertise and skill set. So, welcome, Mary Alice.
Lovely to be with you, Martin. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Tell the viewers a little bit more about you and how you came to do this kind of work.
Well, I call myself a story activist, and I remember a girlfriend talking to a girlfriend about this. She says, "No, don't take that word activist. That's everybody. It feels really weird about that word." And I thought, yeah, that's exactly why I want to have it. I want to reclaim this word. So that title came to me when I listened to a short clip from New Zealand actor Cliff Curtis, where he said something like, and I'm not quoting him exactly, that anybody who works with story is an activist. And I thought, yeah, that's right, I'm a story activist. So I'm interested in story, how it's the human operating system, how it works, how it influences how we think and what agency we think we have in the world. But I'm also interested in what stories we choose to activate. So, which are the stories I choose to put my focus on? And I think that's where my work aligns with yours very much around Project Heaven on Earth. How do we project heaven on earth, really, is that whole question in the story field. What stories am I deciding to focus on? Which ones are generative? Which ones do I allow to live rent free in my head or not? And when I'm aware of how story works, the fact that it is our lens on the world, and one could say, we live in a beautiful fiction. So if something happens out there, a space-time event happens, and I make sense and meaning of it, it becomes my story of that event. But is it the truth? Is it exactly what happened? It all depends. But those stories then shape how I view the world and how I view what I can do in the world, who I can be. So I first began learning something about story in 1992 when I went to a storytelling festival, and I watched people in the room get visibly moved by the storyteller. And I looked around and I just had that thought of, oh, what's happened here? I might, it's one of those days when my ears, maybe my hair was standing on end slightly. That moment when you come in contact with something that's important to you. What happened here? And then the second thought, which came a split second later, I wonder if I could do that. And then I spent a long time haunting the library in the 398.2 section, which is the folk tales, fairy tales, myths, and legends. Later on, somebody said to me, what kind of stories do you tell? And I heard another storyteller respond to it in a way I've loved ever since. I tell the stories that fit my tongue.
Oh,
And I tell the
oh,
stories that are needed at the time. So for a long time, I had in my work as a facilitator, first of all, the desire that my love of story and my group work would somehow intersect, which is what has ended up happening. But secondly, that I would be able to tell the story that was most needed in the moment. And I thought that meant I would, like make it up on the spot. Woo, magic. But actually, I learned that it is more like being a hunter-gatherer who has a basket on her back of all the things she's experienced and picked up and heard and been shared with, and that the story that is needed in the moment will arise if I trust myself and if I trust the stories enough to give the story when it's needed. And this morning I was doing an interview with a storyteller who works with young people at risk, and she said, here's two things you need to know. Number one, it's not about you. And number two, the young people need the stories even more than they need you.
mm.
And I think that's true. It's like we need each other's stories sometimes more than we need bread. So in discovering this kind of magical world, which is, I suppose, actually the human world, discovering kind of humanity at its basic form, it kind of indicated to me what I needed to be focusing on, what I needed to do.
Amazing. Wonderful. When you talked about activating a story and agency in story, one of the stories that I think is fundamental in the world is this is not heaven on earth and it can never be. And so I've been thinking a lot lately as well about the idea of agency. Talk more, if you would, about what gives me agency, what gives a person agency in the story they tell about themselves and the world, and how do you activate a story?
There are a few things that flow into that. I mean, the first one is the metaphor that we use around what is a story. A story is it's a telling of a certain particular space and time, from here to here. So life flows on like a river, and it's hard to understand. But the way we have sought to understand it as humans is to break it down into these moments. When I can look at these moments that have happened, I get a sense that my life is moving on, that things are going. And it's like a snapshot. I can look at a snapshot. I have my kind of personal photo album in my head of these moments that have happened to me, which are defining moments or moments of enjoyment or whatever else. And these moments act like a frame on my life, or like so that's one metaphor. It's a frame.
Yeah.
And whatever is inside the frame is what I can see, and what's outside the frame I can't see. Or maybe I could use the metaphor of a suitcase. You know, I realized when I moved to New Zealand, I was 25, and I had that thought. This is before the internet, right? I thought, wow, I'm going to a new country. No one knows my mother here. Because my mother was a high school principal. She knew all the stories of all the people and all the kids and how everything fit together. And my voice was quite similar to my mom's. So when anybody would ring me, they would always go, "Oh, Alice." And even I have her name in my name, right? So I was like, yay, I'm going to New Zealand. Nobody will know me here. I could be a totally different person, I thought, optimistically. But then I realized I had this thing, this secret thing attached to my leg by a leg chain, which was my bag of stories, that how I defined myself, who I thought I was, what I thought I could achieve, actually was inside that suitcase I was dragging around with me. And unless I opened that to have a look and did anything with those, then in fact I couldn't be an entirely different person, because who I thought I was defining what I could do. So this word agency really is, what action can I take? What can I do? How can I have impact or move something in the world? Depends very much on my view of it and who I am at that. So if I have a story that I am a victim of something and I've decided to define my identity by that, then it on one level keeps me. And that's a challenge for people who are applying for funding from an aid agency, for example. They get defined by the story that they bring to that agency. They get asked to tell it again and again and again, and it really starts solidifying into their identity, when who they truly are is any number of miraculous things. That just happened to be something that happened to them. So depending on how I think of my wounds, do I allow them to define me, or do I say, hey, there's gold in them there hills. If I dig into this enough, I will find the strength that this experience decided to bring me, even if I hate the way I got it, that strength. Those are two different ways of looking at the same story. So what happened to me is what happened. What I decide to make meaning of it as is my choice.
Wonderful. And so that's the agency. What I've been saying agency is declaration. My saying that this is the story I and the world are now living in, heaven on earth. And you're saying the same thing. The application of meaning comes from your saying so. So that if it's a story that's overwhelming and that has you're the victim. If it's a story that you can observe and go, okay, I see what's going on. I don't like this. I like this. I have agency. It's kind of like stepping outside the story and speaking or declaring from agency, from who you
Yes.
are.
So there's a difference though between simple and easy,
Okay.
right? So it's simple to say I choose the story means this. The not so easy piece is how that story is attached to me and how it's woven my identity, and whether I can let go of that identity. Number one, whether it's safe to do so, or number two, whether I might lose so much in doing so that I don't know what to do. So as part of the work for Story of the Future, which is a project I've got going on. I've interviewed a guy who used to be the head of the Coromila Peace Center, which is in Northern Ireland. They do a
Yep.
lot of work around the two different sides of the conflict that's been in Northern Ireland. He's done a lot of conflict work all over the world. And there is a particular way that, and they call it their iceberg model, there's a particular way that conflict grows, escalates, kind of goes up and down, and then how it finally de-escalates. And if you're one of the protagonists in that line, your story can move on, but underneath the surface, what's underneath that iceberg, and we know 2/3 of an iceberg is like underneath the surface, right? What's underneath that surface is narrative. And all the people who are attached to me, who I told my story of, so-and-so has always been doing this to us, and they're always going to do this to us, and there he is, the bad guy incarnate. And if all of my hangers-on hold that story, my story moves on, but theirs doesn't, then that conflict can never really clear. It comes to what Colin, who I was speaking to, is called a hollowed out peace. It's not a true peace because it's like we've gotten so far, okay, we survived it this long, we just don't want to be fighting anymore. But it hasn't changed if we cannot let go of the storyline.
And what causes that letting go of the storyline collectively to occur? By the way, you're saying the word peace, P-E-A-C-E, not P.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
What allows that?
Peace.
Yeah. What allows the collective to go?
Sometimes it can be, if we let go of that storyline, we've lost our positional power in this society.
Yes.
People aren't afraid of us anymore. Therefore, who are we now? Or we made a lot of money out of that conflict. If we let go of the storyline, we don't have any livelihood anymore. Or people have expected me to do this to carry the burden for them. And what if I decide I don't want to do that anymore? Then who are they and who am I? And are they going to push me out of this society because I no longer want to carry this story? So it can be edgy to change your story. Which is ever more reason to become more and more conscious of what stories am I actually carrying.
Very good. I was going to the same place. Yeah.
So every person is a story field. We're not one story. We are the collection or the intersection of all the stories we hold about ourselves, all the stories we're carrying from our culture, from our family background, from our ancestral lines. We may not even know what they are. There's one storyline in my family. I can't remember which aunt this was. But there was a line in the story that always said, and so she swept around him for 26 years.
Swept as in broom?
Swept as in broom, so she cleaned up around. So what does that say about what my ancestral line believes relationship is like? Or what women do in order to survive or make do with what they have or any of those kind of things? And what am I carrying as a result? I don't know that. It's somewhere in my story field. But it's really interesting to begin looking at what are the pieces I'm carrying and therefore what's enacting itself in my life because I have this storyline.
Very good.
This view of the world.
Very clear and very wise. It's not, a quick, because of the collective, it's not necessarily quick. And the realization of that kind of brings a peace to me that it's okay, it does take time. We don't want to rush it. And we want to be wise about doing that. I want to move with you to two other points. One is you make a distinction between words and story. Can you distinguish that for us?
There's a nice little phrase that says, words are how we think, stories are how we link. And interesting enough, I was interviewing Peter Block this week too for our series, and he was saying all transformation is linguistic.
Oh.
So that's interesting. It's like, exactly as you say, I have to make this declaration. I have to declare that something is different before it can begin to be different.
Yeah.
It has to somehow come out of here, out of the thought process, and be externalized in the world so that it has a different kind of life. And then be enlivened by the spirit we want to keep pumping into it. And with each of our stories, we do that. We enable them. In the old days, they used to say, the very old days in the Celtic times, they used to say the way you took the power away from something was to turn your back on it.
Very good. Very good.
That's an interesting thing to think about.
You talk about, you're interested in the future of storytelling, which blew me away the first time I heard that. And you say that there are three waves to storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about the three waves and how that fits into the future of storytelling.
This is a conversation that two colleagues of mine and I have been in for some years now. It's David Drake, David Hutchins, and myself. They're both called David, so that makes it easy. But we were talking about, and David Drake is a narrative coach, so he works with people on kind of shifting their own storylines, individually and organizationally. David Hutchins is a leadership storytelling guy, and I've done a lot of group work. So it's been interesting for us to think about how stories work. And we looked around, we said, there appear to be these waves of story. And what we're in right at the moment is what we would call the wave of influence. People have become really aware of storytelling. It's in all the media. We call everybody a storyteller, our artists, our musicians, some of our politicians, not all of them. We call all authors, we call those people storytellers. So there's this awareness that when you can tell a good story, it has influence. And
Yeah.
so leaders in many different aspects of life are going after learning how to tell stories because they want more influence. And certainly our marketing communications, those are all things about influence. So that wave is really big. And then when we talk to each other, we're okay, what's the next wave of story? What comes after that? So influence is one power that story has, but it's not the only one. And so we went, okay, as we're looking at it, we think the next wave is collective sense and meaning making.
Mm.
It's
Yes.
fabulous when somebody does a PhD. It's even more fabulous in my estimation, having experienced it, when a field of people together make collective sense and meaning and the wisdom in the field rises. There's something really important about that, because when we are together on something like that, all of us benefit. The wisdom quota in the room, in the society, everywhere benefits. And we can use stories to do that. That's a lot of work I've done on Collective Story Harvest, is about listening to a story or a set of stories through a number of different lenses, and then reporting back, okay, I was listening to the story from the lens of resources and resourcefulness, and here's what I've learned when I heard that story about resources and resourcefulness, what we already know. And here's where I feel like the edge is and where we could go. And when we all apply our wisdom like that, I mean, number one, the brain loves having a job. Woo, it just goes, yay! And we get a lot out of it. And the person who's telling the story receives their experience back. They might have given it in stereophonic sound. They receive it back like an IMAX theater.
Lovely.
There's the difference. So second wave, collective sense and meaning making. What happens if we looked at the history of the United States, if we looked at the lifeline of this particular organization? I've spent a long time looking at the time that Denmark went bankrupt in 1813. What did we learn out of that period, which 50 years later resulted in the golden age of Denmark? So when I say to Danes, I'm interested in January the 7th, 1813, they go like, why? I said, because that's when Denmark went bankrupt. They went, we did? Nobody knows about that part in history, and yet everyone has studied the golden age. What is the setup? And one of the premises in that story is we are not using our crises appropriately. We're missing a great opportunity in the crisis we already have. That's sort of fascinating. So that's the second wave. And then we feel like the third wave is healing and holding. Holding meaning bringing the fragments back together into a whole. And, as I look at my work going into groups, I think anytime a group comes together, some healing is needed. That might be, where the six of us are meeting over dinner and I just need you to hear about my day for a moment before I can be fully present. It might be somebody in a executive team needs an apology because they've been treated really badly. It might mean somebody needs inviting to the table because their story hasn't been allowed to come in yet. And before it is, we're not actually complete enough to move on our work. So this is usually not overt, but it's in the room. So in my work, I've noticed that. This is why I do check-in. Every voice needs to come into the room at the beginning so people can even be present. Okay, so we had this, and last year I decided I would publish a series of blog posts on these topics. Yay, I'm going to leap into print along with my 6 perspectives. So I think there's some ways of working with story, like story as a leadership practice, story as a learning process. So I went to print with those. I did the first blog post on wave number 1, influence. 4,000 people read my blog. I was like, I'm a professional. Wow. Woo. Okay. That felt really great. Next
Yes.
week, published on collective sense and meaning making. Very expectantly, I pushed the send button. 800 people read the blog post. I'm like, what happened? It's like being followed by a herd, and then all of a sudden the herd deviates off to the water hole over there. Okay, so but I still felt optimistic, so I published the third one on healing and holding, and 250 people read it. So first I was sad. What's happened to my brilliant blogging career? And then I suddenly realized, I'm right. This is showing me, yeah, people are really, really interested in influence. There is a marginal interest or appreciation right at the moment of collective sense and meaning making. There is virtually no recognition, at least from a business capacity, that healing and holding is needed in order for us to move forward in our humanity and at work.
Brilliant.
Okay.
I mean, I love this interview because I'm noticing that I'm not saying anything. I'm just listening deeply. So thank you. Thank you. People want to find out more. I know that I'm part of this new summit that's coming up. Tell us about that.
Well, the three of us, the Davids and I, plus Amy Lenzo, who's just an absolute wizard in cyberspace, put on a story summit last year called Story the Future. And you can find us on storythefuture.com. We decided as we were listening in on the world, especially this time of fake news and alternative facts and how things are running at the moment, we said we're feeling this clarion call about the future story of story. If story is what intrinsically makes us human, and it appears to be the difference between us and any other mammal out there. We're a mammal that no other mammals tell stories like we do. Elephants remember things we don't. Dolphins can connect over wide distances. The apes have societal structures. We're not different than other mammals in that regard, but we tell stories. That's the difference. We make sense of meaning of the world like that. We share our information and wisdom like that. That's who we are. So it's intrinsic to the human operating system. But once something starts being taught as a tool, as a skill, have you had the latest storytelling training? Then it becomes an it. And then it becomes open to manipulation and lots of other stuff. So we started going, okay, shouldn't something be done about this? Shouldn't we? Because there isn't really a practice field. All the organizational storytellers know each other, the researchers know each other, the professional storytellers know each other, but there's not a lot of interplay between these different ways of applying story. And we said, what if we had a practice field? So number one, it was about connection and community. The second thing was about inspiring people. How do we inspire people that storytelling is more than just knowing how to tell a good story? Because frankly, if you can't listen, you can't tell a good story. Listening is the biggest underdeveloped skill that we have on the planet at the moment. So number two, inspiration. Number three, deepening practice. How do we help people move beyond the box that they have story in their life or in their work? But number four is about stewardship. How do we make a place for a conversation about what is the future story of story? What's the integrity around story? What is morality and ethics around story? Who should tell what stories? What voices are missing? Who are we not paying attention to? Who's allowed to create the story we're living in? All of those questions are really big ones, and it's a great place to meet each other and go, if I want to have agency, I need to be aware of what's going on out there. So that was the underlying, and we offered last year 75 speakers, 42 hours worth of content.
Wow.
This year, people said, too much, and I went, sorry, not sorry. Because my reasoning was, I want to show you everything that story is, and this too, ... was my message last year. This year, we've decided to focus on story making and story shaping in a divided world. So we're having what we call a Story of the Future learning encounter, an opportunity for people to hear interviews, of which yours is one, about different phases. The week one is about my personal story. How do I work with my own story material, myself as instrument? How do I get really good so I can be present? Week two is about community and engagement. How do we use stories to work in communities and grapple with some of the issues we have there? And week three is about deep transformation. What are some of the things people are doing to deeply change some of the ways we're looking at the world through story and how people are perceiving their stories. So there's a set of free interviews, and then there's also a set of 6 workshops people can pay to attend. And it's all about practical, get some skills.
And tell us the website. How can people find out more?
It's www.storythefuture.com.
www.storythefuture.com. Mary Alice, thank you for all the work you've put into this, for your commitment, for the depth of your love for humanity. That's really what comes shining through for me. And your discipline in going deeper and deeper and deeper and seeing what works. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I love you. Thank you for being our partners, for being partners.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.